Brazil is a country with a great ethnic diversity. It has a high variety of races and ethnicities. In this case, the term race is not understood in its biological sense, but in its sociocultural aspects in order to differentiate population groups by external physical characteristics, usually color and other aspects. The term ethnicity, on the other hand, usually defines population based also on their cultural and linguistic differentiation, also involving traditions, religions, and other elements. There is a countless variety of types that define Brazil's ethnic composition. For example, only indigenous people, according to IBGE data, there are about 305 groups that pronounce more than 207 languages. This number is added to the different brands of European, African, Asian, and many other people who descended from the people who migrated to the country during their historical post-discovery period. Therefore, in this work, we will present some of the main ethnic groups in Brazil in their geographical, historical, and sociological spheres.
In the South region, European descendants are about 67% of the population. European immigrants contributed to the development of the economy, based on small and medium real polyculture property. In Rio Grande do Sul received Italian and German immigrants. In Santa Catarina, Azoians colonized the coast, German the north region, and Italians the plateau and the western portion. In Paraná, there were migratory flows from Italians and Germans. Given this perspective, architectural and cultural aspects have become traditional. Immigrants, as well as their descendants, have managed to preserve cultural manifestations brought from European countries. Generally, immigrants are grouped in the form of colonies divided, according to the region of each country. In some cities in Santa Catarina, such as Pomodoro, a municipal law requires the construction of European model. They serve to clean countries and kill homesickness.
Brazil has experienced in the last decade an explosion of the population of Asian origin, largely explained by the return of Brazilians living in Japan and the arrival of immigrants coming mainly from China. In 10 years, the yellows grew 173.7%, although the proportion is still very small. The Orientals and their descendants went from 0.45% to 1.09% of the population. São Paulo, which has the largest Japanese community in the country, ceased to be the state with the highest percentage of Asians and descendants and fell to 7th place, despite having an increase in the absolute number. In this new design of the distribution of Asians, the Northeast and no longer the Southeast presented the highest proportion of the Asian population. The arrival of Japanese to Brazil was not well regarded by society, believing that the process of whitening of the population should be carried out from the immigration of Europeans and not by the coming of yellow blacks, an expression used at the time to designate the Asians who arrived in the country. Despite the conditions, the largest Japanese population outside Japan was established in Brazil, especially in the state of São Paulo, making the Japanese an important member in the ethnic composition of the Brazilian population. From the 1930s, on, Japanese migration was interrupted by the new migratory laws established in Brazil, being reestablished in the post-World War II period. The Japanese have a strong connection with Brazil and its culture, following some curious contributions of Japanese origin that integrate Brazil reality and culture. First one, Japanese drawings have been presented in Brazil since 1960s. The Buddhism religion was introduced to Brazil by the Japanese. Bairro da Liberdade is a typically Japanese neighborhood located in the city of São Paulo. It is now considered a tourist spot. Use of bamboo in the manufacture of handicrafts. Carpa is a species of fish whose breeding has been driven by Japanese. Cherry tree native from Japan that is cultivated in Brazil. Akita dog, a dog that walked with the samurai, arrived in Brazil in the 1970s. During these 100 years, the Japanese taught us to live with their costumes. Words like shiatsu, tatami, karate, karaoke, and many others have been incorporated into Brazilian vocabulary, even though many do not even know that their origin is Japanese. A curiosity that many do not even imagine is that the planting of soybeans in Brazil was disseminated by Japanese immigrants. Before their arrival, it was planted on a small scale in Bahia. Today, it is one of the great essence of Brazilian agribusiness, thanks to the Japanese. Not to mention the typical Japanese dishes we try and adopted, such as sushi, sashimi, yakisoba, temaki sushi, and sukiyaki.
The presence of Indians in Brazilian territory occurs even before the arrival of European explorers. The indigenous population present varied between 3 and 5 million inhabitants. Among this vast population, we observe the development of heterogeneous civilization, among which we can mention the Xaventes, Caraíbas, Tupi, Jazz, and Guarani. The lack of writing sources and the process of decimation of these cultures ended up limiting the possibilities of study. In general, the greatest contact developed between Indians and Europeans took place off the coastal strip of your territory, where indigenous peoples belong to the Tupi-Guarani group predominant. Despite various generalization reports from the 16th century shed light on some of the habits of these people. Even after the indigenous people went through the process of conquest and extermination, they left us with different cultural practices. According to Brazilian folklore, there was legend Curupira, whose main attribution would to be protect animals and plants. Always recurrent in legends, the Curupira had this faith which held far away to confusing hunters. According to historian Sérgio Buarque, the Curupira did not exist, but the indigenous people had the habit of walking backwards to confuse Europeans and pioneers. To desire to walk barefoot has another habit that we inherited from the indigenous people. Many people are in the habit of always walking barefoot when they are at home. In addition, the customs of resting in hammocks is another legacy of indigenous people. The Indians almost always sleep in hammocks that are found inside their ocas. Brazilian cuisine has inserted several habits and customs of the indigenous culture, such as the use of mandioca and derivatives, farinha de mandioca, beiju, polvilho, the habit of eating fish, pounded meat in the on the pestle, and dish derived from hunting. In addition to the habit of eating fruits, melo, cupuaçu, bacuri, sur soup, caju, açaí, and buruti. The indigenous culture influencing Brazilian society does not stop there. The Brazilian Portuguese language was also influenced by indigenous languages. Several words of indigenous origin are found in your everyday vocabulary, such as words related to flora and fauna, such as abacaxi, caju, mandioca, tatu, and words that are used as proper names, such as Ibirapuera Park in São Paulo, which is males, place that was on Splash, where Ibira, males, tree, and poeira was the meaning of something that has a riot been. The Tietê River in São Paulo is also an indigenous name that means true river.